There's a strange kind of grief nobody really prepares you for. You can know, completely honestly, that you would never let someone back into your life, and still miss them. You can remember exactly why it ended. The arguments, the disappointment, the way you felt smaller around them, the things you tolerated that you promised yourself you'd never tolerate again. And yet, on a quiet night, you might still reach for your phone. Not because you want them back, because some part of you misses something. And the confusing part is that you may not even know what that something is. Visual, person sitting alone beside a window at night, phone resting untouched in their hand. Maybe you miss their voice. Maybe you miss having someone to tell your ordinary stories to. Maybe you miss the version of yourself that existed when they were still part of your daily life. And this is where the mind creates a painful contradiction. You can miss someone without wanting them. You can love what something once meant to you without wanting to experience it again. Psychologically, those two things can exist at the same time. And understanding why they do changes the question completely. Instead of asking, why do I still miss them? You start asking something much more revealing. What exactly am I missing? Because the answer may have very little to do with the person. Think about a normal evening. You see something funny. For a second, your brain automatically thinks, I should send this to them. Then you remember. You don't talk anymore. There's a tiny pause. Maybe you open their old messages. Maybe you look at a photograph. Maybe you wonder what they're doing now. And then comes the part that hurts. You remember the bad things too. You remember why you left. But your brain doesn't replay the relationship like a documentary. It retrieves pieces. A laugh. A place. A smell. A song. A specific afternoon. A version of yourself that felt understood. This happens partly because human memory is associative. Your brain stores experiences through networks of connected details rather than as perfectly organized files. One emotional memory can activate another. A song can bring back a person. A street can bring back a relationship. A season can bring back an entire period of your life. And suddenly, you're not simply remembering them. You're remembering a whole emotional environment. That's why nostalgia can feel so powerful. You're not just missing an individual. You're temporarily stepping back into a world that no longer exists. And there's another layer. Your brain becomes attached not only to people, but to patterns. The same messages. The same conversations. The same good morning texts. The same arguments. The same person being there at the end of the day. Even when the relationship was unhealthy, your nervous system could become familiar with its rhythm. Familiarity and safety are not the same thing. But the brain often treats familiarity as something predictable. And predictable experiences require less uncertainty. Visual, slow-moving circular pattern repeating like a familiar routine. Imagine walking the same road every day. Eventually, you don't think about every turn. Your brain predicts what's coming next. Relationships work in a similar way. Someone becomes part of your predictions. You expect their message. You expect their reaction. You expect them to be there. Then suddenly, they're gone. The person disappears. But the predictions don't disappear immediately. That's one reason separation can feel strangely unreal. Your life has changed faster than your internal model of your life. The brain is constantly trying to predict what happens next. When reality repeatedly contradicts those predictions, it takes time for the internal model to update. So sometimes you're not craving the person. You're experiencing the discomfort of an outdated expectation. And this is where people often misunderstand themselves. They think, if I miss them, maybe I made the wrong decision. Not necessarily. Missing someone is not evidence that they belong in your future. It may simply be evidence that they mattered in your past. Visual. Two roads splitting in opposite directions. Think of it like an old house you used to live in. You might drive past it years later and feel something. You may remember the rooms, the light through the windows, the people who lived there. the person you were when you lived inside it. But feeling something when you pass the house doesn't mean you should move back in. The emotion is real. The decision can still be no. This distinction becomes especially important when the relationship was connected to your identity. Maybe you were the person who always helped them. Maybe you were the person they called when everything fell apart. Maybe you felt needed. Maybe being with them gave you a role. And when the relationship ended, you didn't only lose a person. You lost a position inside your own story. Visual: empty chair in a quiet room. Sunlight moving slowly across the floor. Psychologists often describe identity as partly shaped through our relationships and social roles. We understand ourselves through repeated experiences. I'm the one they trust. I'm the one who understands them. I'm their person. When that relationship disappears, the brain has to reorganize the story. And sometimes what you miss is not being with them. You miss knowing who you were when you were with them. So what do you actually do with that feeling? Not by forcing yourself to stop caring. Not by pretending you never loved them. And definitely not by romanticizing what hurt you. Instead, start with something much simpler. First, separate the person from the feeling. When you miss them, ask, what feeling did their presence give me? Was it belonging? Familiarity? Being needed? Excitement? Being understood? Having someone to share ordinary moments with? This works because putting an emotional experience into words can reduce its vagueness and make it easier to regulate. Visual: notebook with one sentence being slowly written. Instead of saying, I miss them, you might discover, I miss having someone who knew my routines. That is a completely different problem, and it has a completely different solution. Second, remember the whole relationship, not just the emotionally convenient parts. When you're lonely, memory can become selective. Your mind may retrieve emotionally intense positive moments more easily than the boring or painful reality surrounding them. So don't argue with the memory. Complete it. If you remember the night you felt deeply loved, also remember what happened during the weeks when you felt ignored. If you remember their laughter, remember how often you were anxious around them. This isn't about turning someone into a villain. It's about restoring context. Visual: two photographs side by side, one warm and one faded. Third, identify the trigger. When does the longing usually appear? Late at night? After seeing couples? When you're stressed? When something good happens and there's nobody to tell? The trigger matters because behavior often follows predictable cues. If you understand the cue, the emotion becomes less mysterious. You might realize, I don't miss them every day. I miss them when I feel alone. That sentence can change everything. Because loneliness is something you can respond to. A specific person is not the only possible answer to it. Fourth, give yourself permission to grieve the version of the future that never happened. Sometimes you're not mourning what actually existed. Sometimes you're not mourning what actually existed. You're mourning what you thought it could become. The relationship you imagined. The person you hoped they'd become. The life you pictured together. That kind of grief can be confusing because you're grieving something that technically never happened. But psychologically, imagined futures can still carry emotional meaning. So you don't have to prove that your grief is logical. You only have to understand what you're grieving. And finally, don't turn missing someone into a command. This may be the most important distinction. An emotion is information. It isn't an instruction. Your brain can produce the feeling, I miss them. You still get to decide what happens next. Visual: person standing at a quiet crossroads just before sunrise. You can acknowledge the memory without reopening the door. You can appreciate what was beautiful without forgetting what was painful. You can miss someone and still protect the life you've built without them. Because healing isn't always becoming indifferent. Sometimes healing is being able to remember someone without confusing memory with direction. And maybe that's the mental model worth keeping. A memory can knock on the door. You don't have to invite it inside. Let it stand there for a moment. Notice what it brings with it. A song, a face, a feeling, a version of yourself. Then let it pass. Visual, waves moving slowly toward a quiet shore. Because sometimes the person you miss isn't the person you want back. Sometimes you're missing a chapter. And perhaps the quietest form of moving on is not forgetting someone. It's remembering them, without needing to return to them.